And thanks for staying with us here on Morning Live. Now, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, is in discussion with the Department of Labour and Unemployment, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, I should say, with regard to government's decision to end the COVID-19 temporary employer-employee relief scheme, or TERS. Now, COSATU says that if government ends TERS, it will lead to large-scale retrenchments, as the motivation behind the relief scheme was actually to avoid job losses. The Federation says that the government had initially made the decision of ending TERS without consulting trade unions, and it says that this goes against President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement on the 15th of September that TERS will be extended as long as the country is in a state of disaster. However, this week, the presidency told Morning Live that TERS is not sustainable in the long term, and it was always meant to be a temporary measure. Matthew Parks is COSATU's parliamentary coordinator, and he joins us now to talk more about this. Matthew, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live once more.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So were you as COSATU, aware of this latest development with regard to the non-extension of the TERS benefit scheme?
No, we weren't. As COSATU, we have been having engagements with government at NEDLAC, with our colleagues in business, on modalities to extend it. We had been quite hopeful because in September, the President had said very clearly in his public address to the nation that it would be extended in conjunction with the restrictions on certain types of workers and certain types of companies from resuming work. And what we had seen over those 2 months is that the UF, in fact, was running away from it. And for us, it was quite shocking that the President could make a public commitment and then government officials run away from it. But we've been having discussions. We had made presentations to the Nat Jones Council of Government. They had given us indication that, yes, it would be extended. So we were quite shocked to hear by the side, not even officially, but by the side, that the National Command Council had just decided unilaterally, without engaging Labour or business, to cancel it. It's also important to remember, Sakina, that government doesn't contribute a single cent to the Unemployment Insurance Fund. The UIF is built upon workers' and employers' contributions. And from our side, having read and engaged extensively on the actuarial reports of the UIF, there's enough funds available. They have 114 billion rand of assets available, of which 49 billion rand is liquid and available. Even then, they have 25 billion rand worth of cash available. And all we had asked for basically is two things. One is to continue the scheme as it is for those small categories, less than 10% of workers who cannot resume operation because of the restrictions. That would cost between 9 and 12 billion rand for this 3 months, the last 3 months of the year. And then post-January, we look at a more sustainable, longer-term operation, which would combine support from the UIF, from government, from SARS, from the banks to assist those companies and workers. But if you just simply cancel it and you still ban workers over 60 or have comorbidities, or workers from bars, wine farms, clubs from working, you will encourage those workers to defy the restrictions and to go back to work. That will put their lives at risk, and it also contribute possibly to a second wave of infections, which we cannot afford. So I think for us, there is space available to do it. Labour and business are one position, but government needs to come to the party, and they need to learn to negotiate in good faith. Because what we're seeing increasingly is government having agreements, publicly making them, putting them into law, and then simply walking away from them afterwards. And really, it makes us very wary to trust government's word going forward.
Now, Matthew, you've said that if government ends TERS now, it is reckless, it is insensible. Can you expand upon that? And also perhaps worth explaining to people the whole notion of TERS and that stemming the tide of retrenchments.
Sure. Look, our principle, it's a moral one. Government has said workers who are over 60 or who have comorbidities cannot resume work for their health reasons. And not all workers can work from home. So if you're a petrol station attendant, you're a shelf packer at a ShopRite, you can't pump petrol at home. So that's for their health reasons and for the family's health reasons, obviously. There's also certain types of companies which can't resume operation, like clubs or wine farms which sell alcohol on a weekend. Or you have some companies which must operate at a reduced capacity, like restaurants, at 50%, but they won't be able to sustain themselves at a reduced capacity. So it's about giving support to those companies and workers to help them survive this period. And look, the UF right now has been the only form of stimulus into the economy. It's pumped in over 51 billion rand into the economy. That's much more than what government or the banks have provided. It has literally helped millions of workers and hundreds of thousands of companies to survive and to stay afloat. And you need to help those workers to survive so they have food to pay for their families, to avoid starvation, to avoid people engaging in lawless activities. But you also need to save companies and jobs, because those are the people who contribute towards the UF, who pay taxes to keep the state afloat, who keep the economy going. So if you allow them to collapse like happened in 2008 when we lost 1 million jobs, we'll be making the task of rebuilding the economy that much more worse. And the UF was built by workers and employers' contributions precisely to help them when facing unemployment. We are in the biggest crisis in 100 years. It defies logic that government officials and politicians who have been receiving the salary and are guaranteed of receiving the salary can simply take a decision that puts the poorest workers at serious risk. It really is unconscionable. And the irony, Sakina, is that there is funds available. And we're not sure why government is hiding behind this claim there are no funds when there are 114 billion rand worth of assets available, of which 49 billion rand are liquid and 25 billion rand is cash. And we're only talking about a very small fraction of that amount for this period. So I think for us, government really has to show a bit more moral leadership. And we've really had this difficulty, Sakina, throughout this period, because we've always had to fight as COSATU with government to extend the UF benefits. They've wanted to cut and run time and again. And that is really the only thing holding up the economy and workers right now. You'd have seen that the other parts of the government economic relief package have largely fizzled out or have been a damp squid. The 200 billion loan guarantee scheme, which is the heart of the economic relief package, has only dispersed 16 billion rand, 8%, and is likely just to fizzle out. So this really is what is keeping the economy afloat. And that's why we're pushing so hard, because it's about saving workers and their families. It's about injecting capital into the economy, and it's about keeping those companies' doors open so they can have a chance to survive next year. And it's really critical that we get through this remaining few months, Sakina, because we don't know how this thing's going to turn out the next few months, but also we're likely to see an economic rebound next year according to Treasury's GDP growth projections. But in order for that to happen, you have to keep companies open so they can be there to recover. You have to keep workers employed so they have a fighting chance to retain their jobs.
What you're saying is very interesting, Matthew, because government, for its part, has said that TERS, firstly, was meant to be a temporary scheme, and that, secondly, they are not that particular scheme is not financially sustainable. You saying it is. So what is government reading from, and where are you reading from?
Sure. With the stats we are reading from the UIF and from the PIC. We've met with them extensively. We had actual engagements with the actuarial, the auditors, and it's clear that this is their facts. 114 billion rand worth of assets available, 49 billion rand worth of liquid assets, so the stuff they can immediately access, of which 25 billion has already been converted to cash by the PIC, which manages their funds. So there's no threat to the UF. We think at times they're being overly conservative. They told us they want to budget for a full 3 years worth of full reserves. Not every worker is going to always claim from the UF. I've not claimed from the UF, you are not claiming from the UF. So they're being overtly conservative. But we also think there's an element of people who want to put the balance sheet of the UF ahead of workers' needs. They want to put the profit motives of fund managers ahead of companies who need to survive, workers who need to keep their jobs. And for us, it's a moral issue. We're facing the greatest economic crisis in a century. We have to put everything we can to keep the economy afloat, to give us a fighting chance to recover. But also, Sakina, government has no moral standing on the UF issue. It is meant to contribute to the UF according to the Unemployment Insurance Amendment Act of 2018. It has refused to do so. So the only people who have contributed to it are workers and employers, and both trade unions, federations, all of them, and organized business and NELEC have been unanimous. There is funds available. There is a need to extend it for this 3 months, and it must be done. But we agree with government that post-January, we do need to look at a more sustainable, longer-term package, which we think could be a combination of the Unemployment Insurance Fund, helping with workers. It could be SARS, giving tax rebates for fragile companies like restaurants or clubs. It could be National Treasury saying, we don't want clubs to open, so let's rather give them some money to stay closed, to avoid a second wave contribution. But also the banks should also contribute because they've got huge resources and they need to give more favorable loans or lower interest rate or debt write-offs to some of those companies too. So we think going forward from 2021, let's have a combined social compact package which can give support. Because right now, to be honest, the only thing holding up this economy has been workers' funds in the UIF. And it's time we think that government, the banks come to the party. But I can't emphasize it enough. Government has to learn to negotiate in good faith and learn to honor its agreements. It can't simply chop and change its agreements as its mood feels like it, or allow itself to be manipulated by a few heartless bureaucrats.
So what are you going to do about that as COSATU? Because as you say, you are not aware, you learned through the media. And I keep emphasizing this every time I speak to COSATU, Matthew, that you are part of the tripartite alliance. One would think that you are in the inner circle there. So when you learn things through the media, the rest of us go, so what exactly is happening here? What's going on?
No, sure. Look, I mean, the alliance is not an easy thing. Like I think any marriage, it has its moments of dysfunctionality. But for us, we're not cutting government a single moment of slack. So when government blunders, like on this case, we're in public with it. We didn't hold back on the punches. Now government is telling us they want to negotiate. We met with them over the last 2 days. We're meeting today. And for our position, it's a position of no compromise. They must do it. We've written to the president through NEDLAC. We've contacted him directly. We've called upon his intervention in this issue. We understand that he is looking at it. But other thing is that, look, we reserve our legal rights because the president made a public commitment, but also even more critically, under the disaster management regulations, it's very clear. It's the force of law. It says the TERS benefit of the UIF will stay in effect for as long as the disaster management regulations are in effect. That's in law, has not been changed. So any worker or any employer would be in a very strong legal position to take government to court for not extending it, and they would win it hands down. So that's our last option if we have to, and we'll do it jointly with business in all likelihood. But we don't want to have to go to court. We're hoping in the next few days government will see logic and reason, develop a little bit of a heart, and then we can find a way going forward.
Matthew, we have to wrap this up, but I just have to speak to two very quick points. Firstly, you have this scheme that is supposed to alleviate the plight for people during this disaster period, and people have been waiting, are still waiting. What are you going to do about that? Because it's an unconscionable thing that is happening where fraud has been committed. The UIF has admitted to that. People have been placed on suspension. People are writing in. They are following the procedures that have been laid out. And then you learn through SCOPA, when the UIF appears before SCOPA, that they don't even have sufficient capacity to deal with the numbers, the volumes of applications that are coming through. What are you going to do about that? I don't want your views on know what you're going to do about that as a federation. And secondly, also, of what good is it if we talk about extending TERS when people have failed to access those benefits to begin with?
Yeah. Look, I think on a macro level, to be fair, to give credit to the UF, despite all the horror stories, which are many, many horror stories, on a macro level, they've managed to disperse about 9 million worth of payments. There's about 1 million applications which are still stuck. On a macro level, they've managed to disperse about over 51 billion rand. We think by the end of this TERS payments, they would have done about 60 billion rand. So on a holistic scheme, they've done well. But the individual horror stories are massive and are very concerning. We've basically, since March, have had almost daily meetings with the UF to try to address the individual applications one by one. We managed to make some progress there, but there's still at least 500,000 backlog cases. But also, I mean, some of the stuff, the failings of the UF are unbelievable. We were also quite shocked to hear that when SCOPA did a visit to the UF that they only had 8 call centers agents on duty. We had been led to believe they had resolved that issue. We met with the UF on Tuesday. They've now told us they put into place a temporary contract provider who will bring 600 call agents on board again. And those are the kind of things that need to be done. But really, I think once we have finished this current period, we need to have a serious introspection with the Department of Labour and UF about the archaic systems of the UF, because it's been the call centers, it's been the online systems, it's been the fact that the UF systems don't speak to Home Affairs or to SARS or to SASA or to PERSEL. There's a lot of horror stories, but right now our focus has been to deal with the backlogs. There is some progress there. But equally, having said that, you can point to a positive macro scale, but if you're an individual worker who hasn't received the money since April, that's not cold comfort. And we want to encourage those workers who haven't received the issues either to phone the UF center or to phone a COSATU office and we'll assist them. We have managed to make quite a bit of inroads in resolving those cases, but really, I think afterwards we need to honestly ask government, what kind of IT system does it put in place? And the need for them to actually engage with unions and with business to ask for help, which has been offered time and again. But really, the systems have been quite shocking. But having said that, despite all the chaos, it's been the greatest injection of capital into the economy, into workers' pockets during this very difficult period.
Matthew, if you could, please, because people are asking questions on social media, if you could on Twitter perhaps just tag me in the avenues that people can actually access assistance from COSATU, I'd appreciate that, and I will retweet it as well. But thank you so much for your time. COSATU's Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks talking to us about the Federation's discussions with government to extend the COVID-19 Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, known as TERS. And I think just, final sentiment there, as Matthew says, yes, they may have the UIF disbursed 51 billion rand, but if there are still 500,000 people almost waiting to be paid, that's a huge number. That's a crying shame, because what is supposed to happen to those people? But we're going to park it there. I will share that information with you on Twitter as soon as Matthew, through COSATU's Twitter feed, shares it with me. And if you need assistance still, that's another avenue that you could perhaps pursue.